Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Astrology channel. This is for planetary day horoscopes for the week of July 15th. Today I have my dear friend and one of the best astrologers in the world, Kyle Pierce. Hi,
Hello.
Kyle.
Hey, Joji, how are you doing?
I'm good. Still looking forward to that Mars-Uranus conjunction.
Can't wait.
Well, we won't have to wait much longer. Well, so with that, let's just get into it. So we're getting started with July 15th. That is our Monday or our moon day, where we have the moon waxing. She is in her own element, which is a water sign. She is in Mars is in the sun's Decan and Venus is in Mercury's terms. She is also carrying a Venus sextile to a Mercury square and a Saturn trine. As always, the moon busy as ever. Kyle, I'll let you get us started on this one because I think you can relate to Moon and Scorpio thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to start by saying that I don't love Monday. It kicks off the first half of the week, which is generally just going to be not tons of fun. For the moon, it's in Scorpio, not a sign the moon always loves, but it's also ruled by the Mars, which is conjunct Uranus and Algol. And we've been kind of waiting for this thing to complete for the last week or so, some of us longer. And there's a way that it makes it a little too real. The moon is growing in light. It's getting stronger and bigger and full of Mars, Algol, conjunct Uranus stuff. And I think when it hits that opposition, that theme sort of signifies something big and toxic that has been building up for a long time, getting unleashed or popped, if you will. There's relief in that, but there's also the mess that follows. What is kind of formulating is not something that we don't see coming necessarily, either individually or in the world. There's something necessary about that, like the tension has to be relieved, the pus has to be drained. It's just nice when you can control when and where that happened. We don't necessarily get to do that with Mars-Uranus. It happened when it happened, and it may be at very inconvenient time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because I think that's kind of one of the benefits of having this happen in a fixed sign, because the fixity of it allows us to have that sort of feeling like, I actually do know where this is going. Like all the pieces are just like slowly moving towards the direction. You just don't know when it's going to explode. And I think that with the moon going through Scorpio and waxing and collecting all of that Mars, Uranus, Algol energy, I feel like it's the collection of anxieties and collection of, in the image, it's kind of hard to see, but we have this person with their head down and clearly in a moment of anguish. But if you pay attention to the background, there's these sorts of like ghostly figures kind of just there, and they're really easy to miss. But I think that was the idea that I was going with, that we're collecting all these ghosts and all these hauntings, and it's because they're so ethereal and so deep in that dark space, it's very easy to just overlook them. And this is something that I can relate to, being like a lunar native myself. There's been a lot of that collection of the Mars pent up energy and just kind of like, I don't want to deal with this. I just want to keep doing my thing. But I feel like this is one of those moments that it's a moment that requires a little bit of tenacity, to have a little bit of the tenacity to face some of these ghosts and so whatever they may be for you. So on our agency to difficulty scale, I think the difficulty is pretty high up there.
Yeah. I think one thing I wanted to say about it related to the difficulty is that when something really difficult or painful arises, we don't always have the equipment to process it. And sometimes it feels so big that we don't really want to. So we kind of press it down. And Mars in Taurus is a very conflict avoidant kind of Mars. There's something that like maybe has been avoided that can't be any longer. You might end up thinking the person who said the remark that set you off afterwards, because otherwise you never would have been able to activate whatever has been like festering.
Yeah.
Glancing of the zit.
That kind of makes me feel like our scale is on a 5 difficulty and 1 agency. But I don't know if you're as pessimistic about this day as I am, so I'll let you also voice your scale.
I mean, I think to some degree, the lack of agency is the strength of it. There's like things that we don't voluntarily want to feel or do or say, and that we'll avoid at all costs, but still need to be said or felt or moved through. And sometimes you just have to be forced into it.
All right, so let's go to our next day, the completion of this opposition to Mars. So this is, of course, our Mars Day, July 16th, and Mars is in detriment, still in his element, in Saturn's Decan, and in his own terms, receiving a moon opposition. And this one was interesting, because I really have been playing with this idea of the terms or the bounds, and planets being on the terms and the bounds, as looking at it as the sign of that planet rules also, that is of that same polarity. This is something that I took from taking Jen's arts. Shout out to Jen, she's amazing. Bounds class. And as I was sitting with this day, thinking about Mars being in his own bounds, and after having this whole difficult journey in Taurus, the key word that I was really sitting with was that the idea of possessiveness, that sort of Scorpio, like hyper protective, this is my stuff. and I'll take care of it, especially being in Taurus. Like, I have fought very hard to be able to get here, so I don't want to relinquish any of my earnings. And I think that the opposition to the moon, it can be that the moon in Scorpio has that bit of a hunger that doesn't bode very well with this Mars possessiveness. The moon is in Mars' own sign. The moon actually would love to have some of the resources from Mars, but then Mars is nah. Screw that. And I think that that's the tension of today. Somebody clearly needs to be helped, but both people in the situation are in dire circumstances. And then one person is a little bit less willing to cooperate than the other. So yeah, how are you feeling about this day, Kyle?
I think that on a general like level, the fact that Venus is in Leo ruling the Mars-Uranus, it definitely brings it home to this. I hate using the word ego-driven, but it's about identity and self. Some of the things that we hold on to are ideas of who we are. Sometimes we base our pride on those things. And when they get challenged, we're unwilling to relinquish something that's outdated or not rooted in reality, or just not really working for you, or just clashing with, somebody else. There's a point where we have to decide whether to stand our ground and defend it and, figuring out which hill you want to die on, or whether or not you want to die on that hill. Algol can be very unforgiving, and sometimes the best way to avoid it is just like staying out of the line of sight to begin with.
Yeah, and I think especially since we're talking about this transit as being like a major transit, not just for ourselves, but like for the whole world at large, I feel like it's also very easy to tap into some of ego-driven survival mode trademark, which is, it seems like the news are probably going to be crazy that day or in the days to come, especially as we get into our Mercury day. But I think it will be very easy for people to just go like immediately like freak out. This kind of sends me back even to like pandemic times where we had like that whole toilet paper situation. It's like survival mode, people get crazy, everybody just thinks about the things that they need to survive, and that's really it. And on staying out of the line of sight, it can be the challenge of the day because everybody's looking at everybody and everybody's just trying to like, are you part of the team? Are you not part of the team? Or like, what's going on here? I feel like that's kind of the thing that I was sitting with for that day. And especially with all the fixity of it all too. I think it's everybody can jump into this unshakable way of seeing the world that might not be so useful for a Uranus moment, because you kind of have to stay bouncy with Uranus.
Be ready to be shaken. Bridges, right? You'll see sometimes that they actually sway in like heavy wind. And that's part of what makes them strong. Having that bendability, that flexibility. And I like the idea of just not to dwell on this one too much, but I think it's an important anchor point for not just the week, but the year. Like it's there's big events happening this week around this Mars-Uranus conjunction. And I think it speaks to something that's happening on a larger scale that will continue to happen with Pluto and Aquarius, like ego survival. As you said,
Yeah.
we often treat the coherence of identity sometimes a similar value as we do our actual survival. And I think what we'll see play out on a large scale is the battle for representation of potentially maintaining the representation or becoming represented. But I think that comes with a willingness to be flexible with how you see yourself and how you feel like you are being seen by others. That sometimes over attaching to either or both is the result of a lot of arguments or a lot of conflicts. I guess it's just the degree to which you want to participate in the battle. I guess it's, again, deciding which hill you want to die on. What's really important to the coherence of your identity.
And just as like a way to round this, and we'll move on to the next day, I think it's also interesting to note that this conjunction is really happening at the end of Taurus, which I think actually really helps us do some of that bounciness, because Mars is at the end of Taurus and will go into Gemini shortly after. Like by next week, Mars will already be in Gemini. And I think that Mars in Gemini has that ability to have a more multifaceted identity and tapping into different sides of that. So it might be helpful to consider it as we go through this heavy opposition time. How would you rate this day, Kyle?
I mean, I would say this is the worst day of the week. It's probably one of the worst days of the year, to be honest with you. So I would just give it it's a 5 in terms of difficulty. There's not a lot I would recommend actively using it for. I wouldn't try to control it too much. You must control where it manifests. Probably your best bet.
Yeah. And I think on the agency scale, I think despite them being in Scorpio, we're actually on the Mars day, and Mars being in its own terms, I feel like it does add a great degree of agency. But I think that's actually what can contribute to some of the tension and the difficulty of the day. I think we can go with a 5-5 for this day, but the difficulty is actually not tapping into some of that agency to do things that may not be helpful in mending some of the tension, and it could actually even more so contribute to more of that tension. So this is a day to kind of just try and center yourself. I think if there's anything to do today, it's that.
Yeah. Stay out of the fray if you can, would be my my advice.
Let's move on to our Wednesday, and we continue on this Mars conversation. Mars is really kind of steering our week this week. So we have Mercury still in Leo out of their element in Mars's Decan in their own terms and applying to a Mars square. Yeah, so this one, Mercury and as you guys are going to see, Mercury and Jupiter have been two planetary days that I've been kind of using the images to really understand it and like really building onto that narrative. Because if you guys remember from the previous horoscopes, we started with Mercury and Leo kind of super energized, ready to present or to express themselves in whatever way they saw fit. And then we had a bit of a fumble last week. And then now we're kind of like not post-fumble. We're still in heading towards that fumbliness. But I think that last week there were definitely moments where it got Mercury to reconsider some things. And I think that the thing that I'm playing here with the image is also a bit of the frustration of having to reconsider those things. And this one is a very personal one for me because that is the day of my birthday. And of course, this is in my solar return chart. So I was doing a lot of thinking about that, especially you guys know my website is the Mercury Rising. Mercury is like a huge player in my life. And that sense of like, oh, I thought this was going to be so easy and I was just going to do this thing and it'd be awesome. And then you realize that you actually have to do a lot more to actually make that happen. the frustration that comes with that, I think, is the most palpable thing today. Mercury being in their own terms, I think, is very helpful because then it's, yes, I got to do this thing. I am very upset about it, but I know what I have to do, so I just have to do it. And I think that's the silver lining of the day. What do you feel, Kyle?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think my general feeling on it is still I'm not in love with the I think there's with the Mercury retrograde kind of looming in the distance. This part of Leo, the last decan of Leo, it's a bit dodgy. A word is that the word I'm looking for?
I think
Like
so.
it's a little defensive, but also willing to hold ground, whether it's tenable or not, in the aftermath of the Mars-Uranus, which is still overcoming everything in Leo, kind of dominating the conversation. There could be a lot of dwelling on grievances or sitting with all the things you could have said to the other person after the argument. Sometimes we just got to move through that mentally to kind of feel out those thoughts and re-establish our footing on our position. There's a tension between just sticking to your argument for the sake of not being wrong and realizing where your position is and where you want to hold ground. Today looks a little bit broody, fermenting in your own juices mentally, which I don't love, but I think the fact that Mars never really completes the square with Mercury, it moved into Gemini, a lot of that frothing post explosive moment is just part of the cooling down process.
So, how would you rate today as far as difficulty and agency goes, Kyle?
I guess it's less difficult than the day before, like a 4, but
Yeah.
still, this is still the bad part of the week. Wrapping it up, this is part of the process. But the fact that Mercury is going to be revisiting, this is where it's going to station direct again, the end of August. So we haven't arrived at the final position of wherever we're at with things today. Like a good 4 out of, it's manageable.
Yeah. Like an even 4-4 sort of thing. Yeah. I feel like Mercury, and maybe I'm just a bound guy, but I feel like Mercury being in their own bounds is a big deal. It can really be helpful in this situation, even if the only help is just being able to think through the situation in a more direct way. Now that you have a little bit more information, you can really sit and crystallize some of those ideas, being Mercury in a fixed sign.
Yeah.
But yeah, just be ready to maybe not commit to that just yet. All right. Moving on to our Jupiter day. This is my favorite image of the week. We have Jupiter in detriment still, in his own element, in Mars's Decan and in Venus's terms, and soon actually being received by a Venus sextile, which is really what I was playing with this image, because for the past little while, all the Jupiter images were tons and tons and tons of papers and documents and books and all these other things, but then now with the Venus sextile, all of that becomes artwork. And artwork still carries data, still can carry information, but I think it allows you to see things from a different angle. One that's a little bit more pleasing and easy to digest, because I think especially people, as because we're reading horoscopes for people, we're very visual people, and receiving information in that way, especially when it's very curated, can be really helpful for Jupiter's situation. What do you think about today?
Yeah, I think today is more where you start to be able to get perspective on things. While Jupiter is coming from a different place, right, than where the fixed sign, hellscape has been going down. It's contributing, like when we have a big problem in life, often that can take up so much space and it feels like it's just, my life is terrible because X is happening here. I got fired. Everything sucks. While Jupiter isn't necessarily offering solutions to like the Mars-Uranus problem, it's offering different ways of seeing life, sort of a reminder that, well, this terrible thing may be happening, but there's also goods to be found in this part of life. And we don't necessarily have to take everything so personally, being able to see yourself from multiple perspectives. that like Jupiter breeze sort of coming through as a sort of, well, you could look at it this way. And from that angle, it's not so bad.
Yeah, this is where the week really starts to shift towards a little bit of more a more calm. Calm is not the word, but it's calming down. It's slowing down.
Yeah.
I think that the Jupiter, hey, let's just look at this from a different angle, or let's just think about this other idea that you had. Maybe that idea was actually good. Maybe this one that fell apart for a good reason. I
Yeah.
think the benefic sextile can really bring a slight sense of optimism after the storm has subsided. I think it's even good to think that the moon, I believe, is also just moving away from an opposition to Jupiter too on this day. And also the moon is in a fire sign, so it's trine to Venus. And this is something that we'll talk a little bit more about next week. But I think that this day presents a bit more of an opportunity to repair the damage from the Mars-Uranus thing. And repairing the damage might not look like what you thought it was going to be like, because maybe your plans are totally destabilized after the Mars-Uranus thing. But Jupiter, with its ever-expensive ideas in Gemini, I think Jupiter says, though, there are other options. I think that's the good thing.
Yeah, I think after the nuclear meltdown makes the city uninhabitable, the decision that, well, we can't go back there yet. It's going to be a while before we can fix that actual problem, the problem with the actual space. But now that we can actually move on from that space, there's all these possibilities. And actually, maybe I was kind of ready to move on. There's ease in getting to entertain possibility. After something that was being held on to too tightly to no longer be held.
Yeah. The mutability of this Thursday is very much welcome in this fixed hellscape of a week. But with that, I think on the difficulty scale, I'm not going to knock it all the way down to a 1, but I think we can knock it down to a 3. We went with a 4 for Mercury. I think Jupiter keeps helping us do that and knock it even further down. Jupiter, as far as agency goes, doesn't have a log on for him because he's just now like losing some of the dignity that Jupiter had at the earlier degrees of Gemini. But I do still think that that Venus sextile provides a pretty substantial amount of help, especially since Jupiter is in Venus's own term. So it's a bit of a reception. So I think we can keep this trend of going even and just saying today is a 3-3 for me. Do you agree? Disagree?
Yeah. I mean, Venus-Jupiter combinations are almost always pleasant. In context, the fact that it's been like a 5 all week makes it feel like a 1.
Yes. All right, let's move on to the next day since we're already in this. It's a really good segue because it's Venus's day. It's July 19th. Venus is still in Leo, out of her element, in her own terms, in Saturn's Decan, and applying towards a Jupiter sextile, like we were saying.
It's a little nicer from Venus's perspective, especially because the Mars-Uranus stuff is super relevant to what's going on with Venus. This is like kind of feeling yourself again, maybe, after being deeply troubled or challenged, and reconnecting with what is to be enjoyed, even if blood has been spilled elsewhere. There's still good in life, even if terrible things are happening.
Yeah.
In different parts of it.
Yeah, and I really like the contrast of this Venus day to our past Venus day, because our past Venus day was Venus just ingressing into Leo, and we had that Pluto opposition, and you're really talking about a lot of the obsessiveness that can come with Venus in Leo, about just looks and appearance and the way that things look and feel. But I think now that Venus is in her own terms in that sign, we get a much more balanced approach to some of those things. Yes, Venus can worry about how things look, but in regards to Jupiter in that sextile, I think that Venus is, as being the outside perspective to Jupiter's troubles, can be like, hey, this thing looks really good. Just go with that. Like, yes, there's all these other things that you're talking about, and they sound all very exciting, but I think that this one is the one. And that's what I was going with the image, because I really wanted the Jupiter image and the Venus image to speak to each other in interesting ways. And whereas Jupiter is going through this endless hall full of paintings, Venus is the one that's taking Jupiter's scrolls from last week and actually just tossing them on the wind, just being like, "Who cares about this one? We already know which one works." And we as we talked about this also throughout the past Jupiter days, where we even had that nice Mercury sextile to Jupiter, and even just seeing how Jupiter's journey in Gemini really presents a lot of resources to Jupiter at the very beginning. I think that the tricky thing with Jupiter and Gemini is just sticking to the thing that worked first and not getting carried away with all the other things that will come along the way. And I think that Venus is presenting us with a reminder of that. Hey, like, we already know what looks good. We already know what feels right. Just do that, and it will be a lot easier than you think.
This could be a little like PR, like damage control too.
Yeah, totally.
Bring the narrative to one that's a little more complementary. I think there's Jupiter's lending alternatives to Venus. That weird analogy entering my head. But I read this book once when I was a kid about the future dystopian future where everybody was like growing these lesions on their faces and stuff, but they had these implants in their head that made them basically fed them the internet and normalized things in a way that was really destructive in the case of the book. But when everybody was getting these lesions, oh, that one actually frames your face really nicely. You know, there's always a way of looking at things that can be complementary.
But yeah, so as far as difficulty and agency, I think I would knock this day down by another notch and go with a 2 for difficulty. Agency, I think we can also bring it higher and get past or even and go like a 2 difficulty, 3 agency, because they're still dealing with whatever things we were dealing with the day prior, and the day prior we went with a 3. So I think keeping it at that 3 feels really right. Cool. All right, so let's move on to the next day. This is our Saturday. Saturn, of course, still in Pisces, peregrine, retrograde in Jupiter's Decan and in Mars's terms, and receiving a sextile from the moon. This week, despite all of the Mars stuff, it's also a heavy sextile week, especially towards the end of the week. We're really dealing with a lot of those more benefic aspects, which is really nice. This one especially is one of my favorite sextiles because the moon is, of course, in Capricorn, which is Saturn's own sign. The moon gives Saturn a little bit of a glimpse of how things look like back at home. And I think that can be very welcome for Saturn, especially being peregrine for so long. Saturn really only has a little bit of dignity in Pisces at the very beginning and then at the very end of that whole journey. So right now, being in the middle really feels like this, like we said last week, are we even going to get where we thought we were gonna get to in the beginning? And the reason why I chose this image is kind of twofold, because I think that we have these old hands holding a photograph in the image. And I think one way that we could see this is that the moon is the memory, and Saturn is looking back to how she used to be in her youthful days in her own domain, full of power and dignity. But the other way to see this too, and one way that really resonates with me right now, is also looking at how the moon is Saturn's one of Saturn's partners. It's the ruler of the 7th house for Capricorn rising. And another way that I would see this too would just be not the memory of oneself, but the memory of one's partner. And that's sort of like, yes, we're far away, but like I'm thinking of you sort of thing, which is really nice, especially in this, in a space of uncertainty. I think that the memories can be what sometimes get us past these difficult moments. What are you feeling about this day, Kyle?
It's definitely a very backward looking glance. The moon's in Capricorn. It's like not the warmest or best feeling moon, but I think there's like a potential for acceptance of what no longer is. There's kind of I would say the risk here is in overly attaching to the solidity that the past maybe provided. Sometimes that isn't even real. do, because we understand the past. So we understand what the world was to us in retrospect, always, more or less. But when things are very uncertain, when we don't know where things are going or how to even define where we are, there can be a tendency to cling to the past and lament the loss of that certainty. And with Jupiter is like applying, like within orb, I would say, getting into commonly accepted orb with the square with Saturn, which is a little bit better for Saturn, but it's not necessarily what Saturn wants. Saturn wants solid, confirmation of what is, and Jupiter only has like possibilities to offer or different perspectives. Like, it could go this way, it could go that way. I don't really know. The best use of this is in kind of preparing to accept uncertainty. Uncertainty kind of is the landscape now.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. But yeah, as far as difficulty goes with this day, I don't think it's necessarily the most difficult day, especially within context of the week. I'm not sure if it's even a difficult day at all. I think it could be a pretty easy day, especially with this moon sextile, because technically it's a mutual reception, because the moon also really likes the water element that Saturn is in. So despite Jupiter not presenting anything solid to Saturn, maybe it's the moon that can, and maybe there's something to that. Maybe the only solid thing is just how you feel. Yeah. And you're very solid in that feeling, and that feeling is the thing that will carry you through this. So in that note, I think today would be probably a 3 in difficulty. And as far as agency, I think I'll go low, just because of Saturn's current situation. Being peregrine is, I think, at least in my view, is kind of one of the roughest conditions for a planet to be in, just because it's just so uncertain and so unstable that it can sometimes feel like, what am I even supposed to do? So that can feel like the lack of agency. So I'd go with a 1 for agency on this day, but not a difficult day.
Yeah, I would say especially as like a transit or for uses for magical purposes or something. Peregrine planets, they take too long to figure out what the hell they're doing. It'd be really useful in the short term. But the moon, I think, is sort of lending. What would be nice about the moon in Capricorn is that it doesn't need to make a big fuss about its moods. If you can accept that Eleanor is gone, she's never coming back. That's the first step to actually enjoying the memory, of a lost person. It's when you can't accept the loss that, the memory actually grieved you. It'd be kind of like a good Greece, maybe, or like I feel a little sad about that, but that's okay.
Yeah. Anyways, let's move on to our next day, because we're getting at time here. And last day of the week is, of course, Sunday. And as the day itself says, it's the sun's day. The sun is still in Cancer, out of his element, and it is critical, meaning that it's at the critical degree, the very last degree of Cancer. It's in Jupiter's Decan and in Saturn's terms, and trine to Neptune. I didn't forget the outer planets this time. And it is a mutual application because Neptune is retrograde. But the thing that was so difficult about this day for me is that Neptune trine, and the Neptune trine has been very palpable in my life because I have late degree Cancer rising. And that's a thing that has been really hard for me to really describe, but that kind of goes with the Neptune thing. And I think that's a bit of the difficulty today, because it is a trine, so it is supportive. The sun is also about to enter its own sign, so there's that sense of hope and optimism, like I'm about to get home. But I think that the other thing that we can't forget, which I did forget last week with Venus, was that Pluto is really early in Aquarius, and so the sun entering Leo will oppose Pluto. Now the sun is knocking on the door. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But how does home look like now after I've been gone for so long? I think that's the biggest question. Because one of the things with planets in domicile, which the sun will be in, is that yes, it's great, but you also have all these responsibilities to take care of that place. And I think that the sun, going into the Sunday, can have this sort of feeling like, yes, I'm arriving home, but then also I have to repair all these things that have broken while I was away.
It's interesting that this is the day of the full moon as well.
I didn't even take that in.
Yeah, and it's actually the second full moon in Cancer this year, which we don't usually get. I think the way that this one's configured to Neptune, like you were saying, which, is like just retrograded at the very end of Pisces, it's about to, it doesn't know it yet, but it's going to be in position with Pluto. It's at the beginning of Aquarius, which is still going to go back into Capricorn. This speaks to this point of transition, are sitting on the cusp of a big change, like a big paradigm change, or kind of watching the sunset of a time period. It's like we're standing on the door of a new era. There's apprehension about what is going to be on the other side. Maybe there's excitement, a deep sense that, and maybe a realization that, oh yeah, actually everything really is going to be different now. And I really don't know what that looks like. How am I going to fit into that? I think the key with maybe this one is just, again, that's accepting the uncertainty. I think it's going to be important for the next several years, probably, maybe the next 200 years to be fair and all. But
Yes.
The principles are the principles that we've lived by aren't going to continue. So much about it is going to change. But we are kind of sitting on the sunset of an era that seems like a moment of contemplation about how are we going to see yourself within that, or within it.
Yeah, definitely. I think a helpful way to center that into your chart, you as the listener watching this video, is to think about what house is Capricorn in your chart. Pluto will also be going back to 29 degrees of Capricorn. Is that is a very hot spot. Like we're having this full moon now, but there's all these other things that are also happening there. And there's many things that have been happening at that point for the last few years. This can be, in a way, like the closing chapter of that. After Pluto goes retrograde to this 29 degree, it won't go there again for a really, really long time. For me, Capricorn is the 7th house, so I'd be thinking about partnerships. Maybe for you, Capricorn is in the 9th house, so maybe we're talking about your education. I think just thinking about the house itself can be really helpful to just situate yourself in this narrative. But I think this will be especially relevant for the Leo people in the world, even Aries as an extension of that, because these are the two very solar signs. For or Leo risings, this would be more so the 6th house, so maybe it's things to do with health, or maybe it's things to do with your employees or the workplace or the labor that you do in this world. But maybe for Aries, it's a little bit more about your actual career and standing in the world and how you carry yourself out, how people see you and things like that. But yeah, so what would you give this day?
It's not too bad. It's actually, there's something kind of peaceful and quiet about it that I kind of like. There's a full sort of somber realization that comes after putting something to rest or actually moving into a new phase of life that I think could be quite nice. Like everything is shifting, even Mars just shifted signs.
Yeah, to me, it almost feels like when you're watching a movie and you know there's going to be a sequel, and then in the end, it ends on a cliffhanger and it looks a little ominous, but you're also so excited about what the next movie is going to be about.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it feels like, I think.
Yeah.
And to that, I think we can probably give this, I don't know, I think I'll still keep the difficulty at the middle, like a 3, because a Pluto opposition is still a Pluto opposition. But it's the sun in his own sign, so the sun has the upper hand on that, which I think feels really good. And to that, I think agency is probably at a max with the sun, like the Lord of our years, the Lord of our days, going back home. I think that does add a lot of brightness to the uncertain future that we're heading into. So I think I would go a 3 difficulty, but a 5 agency for today. Do you agree, disagree, have any concerns, qualms, or anything?
I guess it depends on where you are in the world.
Yeah.
It may not happen till Monday for a lot of us. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know if we get quite the power of Leo yet, but also pretty low on difficulty. Seems like quietly illuminating. but not necessarily much to be done.
So maybe we go with the 3-4. How about that?
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, well, guys, thank you so much for another episode of our Planetary Day Horoscopes. This is the whole week of July 15th to July 21st. I hope you guys survive the Uranus-Mars thing. I'm sure we all will, or at least a good majority of us will. And yeah, if you want to book a reading with me, I am at, like I said earlier, at themercuryrising.com. And Kyle is at kylepierceastrologer.com. Yes, so with that, I will see you guys next week, and bye-bye.